I think in our language, we focus so much on the individual rights that it's become an entitlement. My right to do this, my right to carry a gun, or my right to drive an SUV in a city and pollute everyone, and we have not done enough work to connect the responsibility, the collective
to consider
aspect.
The collective.
It's, of course, if my right to drive an SUV interferes with your right to breathe clean air, you cannot separate the two.
Welcome to Heart of Change podcast, where we explore heroic and inspiring stories of change.
Our next guest is sure to spark thought-provoking, transformative conversations and inspire changemakers to go deeper in their relationship with social change. Meet Veronica Yates. Veronica brings over 2 decades of experience working for an NGO in human rights and activism. Veronica is the current founder of the Right Studio, leveraging art to educate and discuss important human rights topics. Previously, Veronica worked as a director for CRIN, or Child Rights International Network, both in London and Berlin. She's led human rights activism, pushing for radical changes in how young people are perceived and treated in society. Veronica's personal journey of transformation, marked by the embodiment of the warrior spirit and her practice of Tai Chi, brings a renewed perspective on her look at humanitarian work. I am really looking forward to this engaging conversation. I know we can learn a lot from Veronica, a true catalyst for change. Veronica, thank you so much for sitting down with me on Heart of Change. I really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to a conversation.
Tell me, what does it mean to you to be a humanitarian?
Ooh, straight in there. That's a great question, but it's a really tough question. I think I would probably answer it differently on a different day, I guess a humanitarian is someone who's working for humanity in general, and that could be done on many different levels. We tend to think of humanitarian workers, in the sector I work in, we talk about humanitarian workers we tend to associate with people who are on the ground, who are like bringing life-saving food or medicine to people in suffering. That's usually how we think about it in the sector that I've worked in. But I think it deserves a wider definition, especially today. I think a lot of our humanity is really at risk. Today, there's increasing division and tension and violence and conflict around the world. And so, to me, humanitarian is someone who's working to preserve humanity, our shared values, the values that I think everyone has: kindness, generosity, honesty, helping each other.
You think that humanitarian needs to be taken, if I'm understanding correctly, taken out of just this idea of someone that works for like an NGO or a social system, but like to encompass anyone that embodies those virtues?
It would be great. I feel now we are called to do that. I really feel that when our humanity is being challenged and people are losing their humanity, people are dehumanizing other people, I think now it's really important that we start thinking about what does it mean to be a humanitarian. I don't have the definition, it's something that we need to think about and that everyone needs to think about. I think we all have those qualities in us, but I think many of them are at risk now that we have division and conflict and dehumanizing of other groups. Othering, as some people talk, as some people are referring to it. And I think in the process of dehumanizing, you yourself are dehumanized. So it's not one way only, and I think this is probably one of the most important things we can do today in how we are today, is to think about our humanity and what it means to be a humanitarian and what are those human values or the human spirit, what is that, and how do we I don't want to use the word fight, but that's the word that came to mind. But how do we fight for our, shared humanity? Because it's there, it's in all of us.
When you talk about this, it sounds a little bit like projection. So like hurt people then project hurt on others or something like that. Are you alluding to that?
Well, hurt people, of course. I mean, this is, both on an individual level, but also on a state level. There's a lot of, we talk about intergenerational trauma, for example, which is now understood as something that is in our DNA. It's been studied in particular with indigenous groups, for example, indigenous populations. Yes, I mean, it's not uncommon for somebody who has been a victim of abuse or something to then become the abuser. It's quite common. And we see this repeated in populations in states, actually, who are then perpetrating violence towards another group because they themselves at some point were subjected to violence or dehumanization.
Right.
And that hasn't been healed, and it doesn't heal from one generation to another unless it's addressed deeply and properly. And it tends not to be addressed. Cosmetic things are done, perhaps, but not the deep work isn't done. So then you can then suddenly find yourself being the victimizer, but still think deep down you are the victim. In my previous job, we did a lot of work on, sexual violence against children, which is, we don't really want to go into those details, but, sexual violence against children, which is much more common than we would like to think. It's very, very common. And it usually happens within the family or the close spaces, people close to the children. And there have been a lot of studies that people who then later in life, they themselves abuse children, if you take the time to really understand and look at their backgrounds, many of them have themselves been victims of abuse in their past. This is not to excuse, this is to understand. But if we don't take the time to understand, to really go deep to why has somebody done something like this, then we just go around in circles of violence being repeated and then repeated onto another person or another population. And we just end up in an endless cycle of violence.
Yeah, it sounds like we've been putting Band-Aids on things in a lot of situations rather than going deep within that why.
Absolutely.
And that why, I imagine, has to do with both the subconscious mind as well as I've read about epigenetics and you actually carrying it within you on an energetic level.
Absolutely. I mean, that this is not really an area that I can speak on authoritatively, but there is a lot of work done by a lot of, amazing scientists and doctors and practitioners. I mean, you probably know Gabor Mate. He's just one of these.
Amazing.
Bessel van der Kolk is another one who's done a lot of work on, post-traumatic stress disorder. Started working with veterans in the United States, but then worked a lot with women initially, and then children who were survivors of sexual violence and incest. And so there's been a lot of interesting work done on that, and Gabor Mate has done amazing work. So, but yes, but unfortunately, everyone wants quick solutions,
Quick.
And nothing is quick, So we, there is just not enough time given to understanding why something happens. It's always something happens, quick response, which tends to be today, if we look at the global scale, bomb, someone, more weapons.
Definitely. So I hit you with a big question right off the bat, but you obviously have acquired a lot of this wisdom from over 2 decades of working for an NGO and have this robust knowledge and just personal experience of transformation and of aiding the human spirit. So take us back. How did you even get into this field?
I want to say by accident, but probably not. It's probably serendipity, I would say. I mean, as a kid, I grew up in an international family, right? From mother from one country, father from another, born in another country. And so already that set the stage for, growing up multilingual, but also traveling to see relatives in different parts of the world, which was incredible as a child. But it means you innately have a curiosity for the world, because you are shown, hey, the world is big and there are lots of different people and ways of thinking. And so already there, I guess I was really privileged to grow up with a sort of, and also with parents who were quite open-minded, they were like, look at the world, it's big, it's exciting. And we were, 5 kids. So our parents didn't have time to sort of helicopter parent us in any shape or form. So that gave us a lot of independence, So we were all sort of very interested in what the world had to offer. I didn't grow up knowing this is what I want to do, but I did grow up always being a rebel. I always had a problem with authority, always. I hated school, absolutely hated it. And I was a quiet troublemaker, but I was definitely a troublemaker. I didn't want to, I just couldn't help it. I'm sort of, because I was always very shy, but I sort of grew up being, the teacher would say something outrageous or unfair or, bully another kid or something. And I just couldn't help myself, but want to kind of go up against the teacher. So I always got into trouble. But it was fun as well, most of what we were learning in school I didn't find interesting, and I really like my solitary time. I've always been sort of very, I want to be with myself and think about the world. And so I discovered that if you get kicked out of class, you can go and sit on your own somewhere. So that was brilliant. But I think I always had that rebel seed in me.
Did you find that it was cultivated by the school or your parents or anyone, or did you feel sort of isolated in that feeling?
No, I mean, I think my mother always had the sort of the seed in her as well. I think they would see things and go, this is unjust, or, I think they always had a sort of spirit of challenging things when it's not right. Not in a sort of, they weren't like activists or anything like that. But I think it was the spirit was there, that you shouldn't accept things the way they are, I guess.
They asked the magical why.
I think so. I think that came from them. And then when I was a teenager, I thought I want to be a journalist because I really liked writing, but more for myself, I write to understand myself, I suppose. And so then later when I sort of finished school and I was in university, I had an opportunity to do some work with journalists, and I thought, yeah, this is what I want to do. But then I sort of also started to learn about NGOs, non-governmental organizations, and these groups that were doing sort of solidarity exchanges, and I got an opportunity to spend some time in Palestine. And once you go there, you cannot unsee what you've seen. And I think when I was there, I discovered this sort of rage inside me, and I was like, I would not be a very good journalist because I don't want to report on what I see. I want to get involved. I want to change things. I want to stop this injustice. That's what you think when you're younger.
And you already had the rebel spirit. So
and I had the rebel spirit.
Let's go in there and disrupt.
So, I mean, once I was there, I was like, this is what I'm meant to do, And at the time, this was, some decades ago, the route to get into change was NGOs. So I was like, right, I need to get a job in an NGO, and this is how this is it. This is what I need to do. So that's when I went to London and applied for jobs.
And you were working for a CRIN the whole time.
So initially, applied for many jobs, but initially I got a job with Save the Children, which is a really big organization now. And I was there for a year. Mm-hmm. And then a job appeared at CRIN and it had my name on it, It was like they were looking for somebody with international experience, with English, French, experience in journalism. And I was like, that's me,
So when you entered the organization, what were you doing on a daily basis? Like, what was sort of your intention behind your work?
So initially I was learning a lot, right? Because I didn't know much about the framework you have around human rights. There's an entire framework under the auspices of the United Nations, right? We have treaties, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We have all of these sort of texts that have been written with all of the countries together, and then states then accept these treaties, right? So I was learning a lot, and my work was really, in the beginning, it was information. So it used to be called the Child Rights Information Network. Mm-hmm. And at the time, it was about sharing information with a network. Today, this is no longer what is the most important thing. But at the time, because we were connecting organizations in about 150, 160 countries, it was kind of building relationships with organizations and sharing our experiences on what do these children's rights mean on the ground? How do NGOs use those texts from the United Nations to actually make change in the countries? So it was about sharing, this country did it this way and this country did it this way. And this might get a little bit technical, but you have, for example, a treaty on children's rights. Mm-hmm. Countries then choose to sign up to this treaty. And that means then they have to go through the process of changing their national laws to align with these international ones. So we have all kinds of rights that children have, from education to protection to, civil and political rights, the right to information, to privacy, and all of these various rights. And so it was about, then states have to go every 4 years to the United Nations in front of a committee of experts and say, we did our job, we've done this. But then NGOs are also invited to give the other side and say, well, no, they haven't done that, or they failed to do this, or they failed to do that. And then the committee, from looking at civil society and the state, they then draw up this advice to the states and say, you need to do this, that, and the other. But it was a very new process at the time. And so we were sharing information on how can NGOs do this better.
Mm. It sounds very positive to work in an environment where you have a lot of change makers that perhaps have the same intention, and you can create this sort of collective momentum to getting the work done. Do you feel like in any way it was a disservice to work in a collective environment, or did you find it helpful?
No, I mean, it was incredible. I think, things change over time. And today, that work isn't as much needed as other things. But back then, it was incredible. And it was incredible to be now. And it's with hindsight that I understand this. This is really important in a way. At the time, I was just working and learning, But now I'm like, I was very lucky to be not only working with colleagues, but with people from all over the world. I mean, all over the world. And we all agree. This is important. This is how children's lives will be improved. Mm-hmm. And we all agree on this. Today, this is no longer the case. But at the time, it was incredible, because we didn't have to argue. Is this right or is this wrong? Is this okay that people do this to children? Or is this okay? Now people would argue and say, no, it's fine. And others say, no, it's not. But back then, it was like, we have to do this, It was clear that this was the right thing to do. So it was amazing because it was really, and the work itself was really about building relationships with people, which was about how do we do this better as a collective.
As a collective. And what did you learn from that?
That we're all fundamentally the same as people, but we're also totally different. I'm full of contradictions, by the way.
Yeah.
I've learned to embrace my contradictions. But
How so?
Everything is contradictory, There is no, this sort of binary way of looking at the world that is imposed from, states or politicians or our education system or the status quo. This country is evil, this country is good. It's ridiculous. There's no such thing as one is evil, one is. It's never that simple. And we're also not that simple or binary. None of us are. Nothing about us is binary. Mm-hmm. But I think what I learned was, in particular through traveling, that I would find the like-minded people wherever I went, whatever country I was in. And usually I connect with people on a sense of humor. It's, laughter has always been a huge part of my life. I think most of my friends are my friends because we laugh together. And even in the work, it's really important to also find humor in it. It's essential. Otherwise, we fall into despair or take ourselves too seriously, which I've done as well. But wherever you go in the world, I would meet grassroots people in Nairobi, Kenya, and you connect with someone because of simple things like a sense of humor or a way of looking at things, or, not because of background, education or nationality. At least I don't. And you find that, we all have the same worries and concerns, different levels, but we can all connect. You can connect with anyone if you come with an open heart. If you're not trying to impose your way of being as this is the way to be. Mm-hmm. But of course, this is also the problem, I think, with a lot of NGOs, especially international NGOs. They're very much rooted in the existing Western system, which is still remnants of colonialism. Mm-hmm. And so they haven't been able, most of them, to extricate themselves from this, where we are from the North, so we know what's best. There isn't official colonialism anymore, but we are still better at, we should tell you what your problem is, This is still how a lot of it works, is that the international NGOs come into a country and tell people there what their problem is. That's why most of the work we do doesn't work. Really. Sticking plaster perhaps, but long term it doesn't have a positive impact, because we are telling them what their problems are, because that's what our donors or our governments are telling us we should be doing,
It's still very structured. It's very political. Even though the intention is good and you have this collective group of change makers, it's run by a system. So the system actually works against the cause.
It does. And I think most of the people who work in these organizations, not all of them, but a lot of them have the good intentions. Mm-hmm. But then you enter a system that is no different to other systems. It's patriarchal, it's top down, and you often have to respond to donors, not the people you want to work with.
Right.
And so you're stuck in this system where you have to, you recruit the same way you recruit for anywhere else, You look at what degrees the people have. This actually doesn't matter, This is one of the things that I wanted to change in CRIN, and I think we changed it. We were like, don't ask people to have a degree, because then you're automatically closing the door to other people. And is having a degree really a testament to what someone's behavior, humanity is going to be? It's not. It's really not.
It's not a requirement of the human spirit and an open heart.
It's not going to make you a good colleague, a good friend. It's not going to make you. It might, but it's not. And the problem is then you just keep attracting the same, kind of people like you, and then you can't change if everyone in the room looks like you.
Right. Where's the diversity in that?
You can't.
So what could we do to mitigate that? Because obviously we're going to continue to come together as groups, hopefully, in order to spur change. What could we do to edit the way that we come together to produce more change in the world?
So, change comes from very many places, right? I don't believe that it's NGOs that are driving the change. Mm-hmm. The change comes from people, and it comes from movements of people. Mm-hmm. And it comes usually from the outliers, the radicals, not the NGOs. The NGOs are close to power, usually. I'm speaking of the international NGOs here, right? Mm-hmm. Not the grassroots but a lot of NGOs, they're closer to power. So it's a bit like if you imagine, a race, and they're at the end they're like 100 meters from the end of the race, and They take the baton and they're like, run the last 100 meters, But change comes from many different places, and you need lots of different elements to make change happen. So,
like what? What elements? What are the key elements?
It depends on where we're at in history, I think. Today, if you ask me what do we need, I think we need a revolution. I think we need mass civil disobedience. I think this is really important right now. We need civil disobedience, because decades and decades of being nice NGO workers who sit in the rooms with the politician and ask them kindly, speaking the same language as the politicians, please be nice and change this legislation. It's not working.
I love that radical disobedience.
We need disobedience.
And that doesn't mean to necessarily cause harm. I think there's a peaceful, aggressive way of being disobedient.
There are many, many ways. And I think, people need to connect with past movements, right? And I think that it's a bit like, you could say connecting with your ancestors. If young people today in Europe have, these rights and these things that they can do, it's because of the previous generations, right? Mm-hmm. And those there, because women can vote, it's because of a few generations before women put their bodies on the line in order to give women the votes, and then other groups. And these movements don't stop. It's not, here's one protest and then it's finished. It's connected. And we need to connect with those past and current movements if we actually want to have change.
Because history does repeat itself in some ways, like human nature repeats itself in a lot of ways. So I think we can go back and learn that. But I know from my personal experience, you have a calling. You typically know what you want to change when you really listen to your internal self with that open heart. And you have the human spirit in mind. And sometimes that can be born out of breaking out of the shackles of some of these systems. I know that's how it was for me. I literally had a breaking open of self to then find my change. So I think everybody has it inside of them. It's just they're not always aware that it's there.
They do. And I think also it's important to, the change, this is why it's important to connect it to something, because it's not about me. Mm-hmm. It's not about you. It's about all of us, right? And so I think that there's, you've seen people using the language of human rights or my rights in terms of wearing the mask during COVID. It's my right not to wear the mask, and thinking they are like Rosa Parks, not giving up her seat in the bus. But that's offensive, because the mask is not about you, it's about other people. Mm-hmm. And this to me is one of the big things that I think I want, as myself, as a person who's worked in NGOs, we need to take responsibility for how human rights have been hijacked by haters and destructive-minded people.
And self-interest, I think.
And self-interest.
It's so easy to go there. It's. I was reading recently about self-righteousness versus righteousness.
Yeah.
And it's okay. None of us are perfect, right? But even being mindful of the difference between being self-righteous and righteous is so helpful to just make sure you're thinking about the broader collective when you think of an issue.
Yes. And so, if you, this is the stuff I spend hours thinking about, how has this happened? Why is the, because I'm trying to understand. And if I think about the work of human rights NGOs, particularly in the West, I want to say, is we focus too much on, so speaking in technical terms, you can divide rights into groups. So we say civil and political rights. So that's the right to vote, the right to participate in society, And then you have the economic, social, cultural rights. And so this is about work and about, other things. And we have focused too much, I think, in our campaigning and in our messaging and in our narratives on the individual rights. Forgetting that, yes, I have a right to do X, Y, Z, but not if it violates your rights. It's a collective
It's a collective
thing. So if I have a communicable disease and I go into a restaurant and infect everyone because I've decided it's my right not to wear a mask, no, because you're not respecting other people's rights. And so I think in our language, we focus so much on the individual rights that it's become an entitlement. My right to do this, my right to carry a gun, or my right to drive an SUV in a city and pollute everyone, and we have not done enough work to connect the responsibility, the collective
to consider
aspect.
The collective.
It's, of course. And if my right to drive an SUV interferes with your right to breathe clean air. I mean, this is you cannot separate the two.
That's a great question that people can ask themselves. So when they have a thought about what is right, to instantly think about the collective and just get in the habit of doing that. It's a great tip that people can take just to stay on track with being collective minded.
And so, so that's where coming back to, the activism, what we can do. Read history, go back to, if people want to read, Thoreau wrote this short essay called On the Duty of Civil Disobedience. And so he was appalled by slavery and by the war with Mexico. And so he stopped paying his taxes. He was like, I do not want my taxes to go towards the war and slavery. So he was briefly imprisoned for that. But he wrote this essay, which is we have a duty to disobey when the state is doing something harming others, essentially. But there's lots of, inspirational things that he talks about there. And you can see how this sort of aspects of what he talked about then appeared in South Africa in the anti-apartheid movement, in India, in, Rosa Parks or Greta Thunberg today, there's all of these little, so there's a long history, the suffragettes and, many, many others. There's lots of ways that people can disobey and actually, we have to disobey if a law is harming other people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was reading a little bit about tribalism, and I found it very interesting in tribalism versus nationalism. I think having that tribal mentality has been a real issue, and would love to get your perspective on tribalism.
So I don't, to me, nationalism is a horrible thing. And I don't get it, but that's also because of how I grew up. I don't belong to a country, I just never have. And borders are ridiculous and it doesn't make sense in today's world. So I don't like most of the ways our society is organized. Tribalism appears because, in particular the West, they rule by dividing people. This is the easiest way. You divide people into groups and then you convince them that whatever problems they may be facing in their lives, it's somebody else's fault. And this is easy to do, right? And we all want to belong. Everyone wants to belong. So tribalism shouldn't have to be a negative thing. But unfortunately, we are then convinced that that group over there, or that country over there, or this ethnic group over there, or these people with this kind of lifestyle are your problem. They are the reason why you have problems. Divide and rule, right? It's a European export to their colonies, which is called tremendous violence and harm, and continues in a way. So now everyone is organized into these groups with the help of technology, because this is how the algorithm work. It's categorizing us into these groups, right? And then we are in these echo chambers, and we all agree on who is our enemy. And it doesn't matter. I think whether we think we're on the right side or the progressive side, or we are also tribalist in a way. It's, it's something we need to work at on a daily basis to resist it. Now, it doesn't mean seeking your group is a bad thing, because again, we want to belong. And echo chamber doesn't have to be useless in a way. There is a useful element in finding your people, right? I feel it now today when I realize that increasingly people think human rights is a bad thing. So sometimes I need to go to places where we don't even question it. Of course, but how do we use it too? We all need to find our people as well sometimes, because Yeah,
I think what you're touching on is having a community. I feel like it's two separate things. It's having a community, but then separately, it's feeling like you want to project whatever's bothering you onto someone else.
Yes.
And those are two separate things.
Absolutely.
There's a way that a community can flourish and help a group of people. And then there's like, I'm upset, so it's this group's fault or this person's fault rather. Yeah. And why do you think that is? Why do we have such a hard time healing ourselves from inside on a personal level to where we have to go and project it on another group or person?
Well, because that's hard work, and that's work on ourselves, and nobody wants to really do that, right?
Yeah.
And
or do we just not have the tools really embedded in today's world to do it?
I think yes. I think it's a combination. I think it's a combination of very many things. I think people are scared of where we are today. And there are many things to be scared about. Climate. The climate change and the disasters that are looming, already affecting many people, but looming for the rest of us. I think you cannot not worry about that. You absolutely should worry about that. But also the scale of what is happening in the world. I mean, what do you do? It's like, so everyone
what do
is
you
scared.
do? How do you mitigate fear?
Well, you have to not run away from it. You can't run away from it. You need to develop the tools to be able to look at fear in the face and go, okay, let's look at this. What should I do with it? And what tools do I need to be able to look at fear in the face and not run away? But we are in this time of instant everything.
Yes.
So, there's a problem. Oh, it's his fault, or it's her fault, or it's, whatever group that is, this or that or the other. And that's the easy way to not think about what is it that I'm not doing or whatever. And the other problem, of course, is that the instinctive thing that happens when you're scared is you close yourself. You close your heart. You close even physically, right? When you're scared, you tend to kind of retreat. And we have to open.
We have to open. What tools?
We have to open.
What tools? I know that you practice Tai Chi, and that's been a great way of opening from an energetic perspective and soothing yourself in your personal journey. Do you think that's one tool for people opening? Or how can people open?
I think everyone needs to find their own practice. You know, I would never say do this or do that. But I mean, I would, because I would say if everybody did Tai Chi, we wouldn't have any wars. But, you know, but I think it's hard work. It's really hard work. And I mean, Tai Chi was life-changing for me. I didn't know it was going to be. I thought it was just, you know, really cool way of doing movements with people, slow movements. You know, most people have seen sort of people in parks, maybe, you know, maybe Chinese people in the parks doing these slow movements that are very beautiful. That's what I thought I was just going to do. I was like, this looks great. I need to get out of the office, because otherwise I never left the office until I fell asleep. So I was like, this is a good way of getting out of work and getting out of my head, and getting more into my body. We did do those movements, which are beautiful. And I think one of the first things you learn is you do these sort of like choreographies. They're called forms, but it's sort of a choreography you learn with other people. And usually you have people of all ages and all abilities, which is amazing, because you're learning at the same pace, and you have to learn to communicate with people, not through words, but through your movements, because you have to do this beautiful set of movements together. You know? And so it's very interesting, because already you learn to listen to people through not what they're saying, but through their movements. So already there's that. But Tai Chi is a martial art. I didn't really know that, but now I understood. So you have all kinds of practices that you can learn in your Tai Chi, from weapons to, you know, more martial training, which I also did, to learning weapons and all of these things that I got into and got completely obsessed with. And
it's a great way to read people without speaking.
Yes.
So you become much more intuitive on what's going on around you.
Completely, and it's incredible. And also, you know, the sort of tyranny of the spoken word, you know, it's too much talking sometimes.
Sometimes too much talking.
Often too much talking.
I love movement, because as you know, I dance. I do a lot of like esoteric type of liquid dancing, hand dancing movements. And it's different, but it's my way of releasing and connecting and being at peace, and also a time to be quiet. Well, there's music involved, but I'm not talking. And I think it's so valuable to have some sort of practice, whether it's dancing or martial arts or meditation or just a moment to become more intuitive, more at peace within yourself. Because how else are we going to open our hearts if we're constantly, you know, talking, we're constantly projecting on others? We never have that space to become aware.
And you know, the real work begins when if you decide to take it seriously, your practice, you come up face to face with what is actually the problem in your life, which is yourself, you know. And
you have to face it.
You have to face yourself, and you realize what the main problem I have is I get in my own way. Right?
I've been there.
We've all been there. Yeah. It's normal. It's, you know, I think we've all been there. So you learn that, and it's a huge lesson in humility, you know, and you learn to kind of, but it needs to be not an obsessive thing as well, right? It's like, you know, yoga became this thing that everybody's doing yoga, or, you know, I need to find inner peace. No, it's not about inner peace. It's about, I need to do the work so that when I go out in the world, I'm a better person to others. It's not about finding inner peace, because that's narcissistic.
Right.
I want to shut off the world and be at peace. No. If you want to be part of the world and contribute positively, you do the work. And I have my practice. I do meditation. I do Tai Chi every morning. I walk. So
that you can be part of the collective, and you can leverage your own human spirit to aid the greater human spirit.
Yes, because like everyone, you know, if I read the news, I get angry, I get sad, I cry every day when I read, but I do it because I want to bear witness to what is happening in the world. And this is also part of the training. It's like, don't turn away from the pain, but learn how to
how to manage it.
Manage
and I
it,
do think
live
it's a
with it.
maturing process, because first you have to
course.
come out of yourself, then you have to face your own pain, then you have to stand in your human spirit, then you have to aid the collective human spirit, and then you have to mature in that relationship with the greater human spirit. So I do think there is sort of this process, but even creating the awareness, like hopefully from this discussion today, that alone, people can take that and start to evolve or start to move in that direction, because it's so greatly needed.
It is. And I think this is, if you look at what is going on in the world, and, wars and conflicts on the rise, and again, if you could take this need for self-awareness and the work onto a state. The state has to do it as well, because it's a sort of macro expression of our collective, negative energy, right? And if I don't do my own practice, I get angry, and then if I go out into a conversation with you or anyone, even at the supermarket, and I'm full of rage on the inside, it's not going to come out in a positive way on anyone I meet or encounter, right?
Yeah.
So, I want to smile and have a nice exchange with the person I encounter in the supermarket to make their day a little bit better, and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. So this Tai Chi practice, did that stem from your research and your work with Margaret Wheatley?
So the Tai Chi came before.
Okay.
And the Tai Chi found me, or I found it, I don't know. But so I did maybe sort of 7 or 8 years of Tai Chi training before I then learned about the warrior training, the warrior for the human spirit training. I think the Tai Chi probably prepared me for it. I understood that with the understanding that humility was really important. I can't say I'm there yet, but I know I need to get there. It's a lifelong process, I think, having humility. Maybe you have moments of having humility, but I think it's a lifelong process. The ego is always there, going, yay, I'm this or that,
I read something that says that you can sit in your spirit and use your ego almost as a tool out in the world because we have to have some sort of ego to function in today's society, but you sit in your spirit and your ego serves your spirit. I think it was Gary Zukov in Seed of the Soul.
That. Interesting.
That I read that.
But yeah, so I think with the Tai Chi, it also made me really interested in sort of Eastern philosophies, and the many different ancient texts. I mean, Tai Chi is very ancient, right? It's not a sort of a millennial invention. It's existed for thousands of years, and it's my current teacher once said to someone in the class, he said, Tai Chi is philosophy through the body. Which I was like, wow.
It's beautiful.
I was like, that's it. So you can take it as just a movement you do to de-stress. It's absolutely fabulous. But if you actually want to go more deeply into it, then it's really hard work. It's not going to happen over 2 weeks. This is the thing about if you decide that I need to understand how my behavior, how my way of doing things is impacting negatively, or understand how I do things, how I show up in the world, and if I want to show up in the world in a more positive way, these are some of the things I need to do. So I learned that. And the other really important thing as well is not to take yourself so seriously, because at the end of the day, here I was, an adult, running around with a sword. It's ridiculous, but it's also funny and beautiful and, all of these things. But it's fun. It's so important to also bring back play, because play opens our minds to not only let go of all of your hang-ups or whatever it is that gets in the way of you being, yourself, your true self, but it's fun as well, and it opens the door to creativity.
For sure.
Right. That's why children play, and that's why children should be encouraged to play, because this is how you experience the world creatively, right? And so the warrior training appeared when I really needed it. I went through burnout, which I didn't take care of. And so I got really ill. I wasn't able to work for quite a long time. Well, I continued working. This is why I got even more ill. But this training appeared, and it was a combination of, teachings and learnings, meditation, and meditation training, and Tai Chi. And I mean, I was like, I couldn't believe that something this incredible existed, Wow. This was a way to bring together sort of my experiences in leadership together with my Tai Chi, and they fit together completely naturally,
Was it showing you parts of yourself that were working in terms of making change and parts of yourself that weren't working? Did it highlight those different areas?
I mean, it does every day. Right. So it's an ongoing training, and
it evolves. It's constantly moving with you. It's like checking in.
It's like checking in, and it can be infuriating in the beginning, because you may, you believe this thing, for example, all your life, and suddenly you're like,
whoosh, the veil is off.
The veil is off.
Yeah.
And that's hard. Right.
Or it's wonderful.
Oh, it's liberating.
You realize, and it kind of opens you to being open.
But oftentimes we hold on to the things we believe because it's our safety net, right? Mm-hmm. I believe this is right, or I believe my country is awesome, or I believe my family, or, whatever it is, or opinions. My God, how much do we hold on to our opinions? Mm-hmm. But through this training, I realized a lot of these things were just suddenly poof.
Yeah. How real are they, aside from just the human spirit and just the open heart? Everything else is subject to question mark.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then if you are so inclined, you realize, oh, hold on a minute, this is liberation, actually, right?
When you realize
let go of things, it's a form of liberation. Mm-hmm. But it sounds maybe very abstract, but, with the training, for example, some of the sessions we had, one of them was, what is the difference between confidence and arrogance? Mm-hmm. And so we do work on that. We have conversations, and and even just posing the question, like, oh, that's interesting. And so we learn that, arrogance and self-doubt or insecurity, they're both the ego. They're kind of the same thing, actually, and but that doesn't mean you have to be, it's not one or the other. It's actually, you can have confidence.
So what is real confidence to you? How would you define it?
Wow.
And I know it's a word, and I know it's a label, so subject to change. But right now, what does it mean to you to be confident?
To me, it's being able to, and this is for me, right? This is a personal thing, I guess. To me, I feel confident when I am honest, when I'm able to speak honestly on whatever it is that, that is at stake. Mm-hmm. And when I feel courageous. So when I can speak to what needs to be spoken, even if it's going to upset someone, not hurt someone, that's a different thing. I don't want to hurt someone, but, speak out on an issue when everybody is silent, for example. So it's when I feel the courage to do that.
I think people feel intimidated by that because we are imperfect, and they feel like if they speak honestly, but they are not evolved to a point or sitting in a peaceful place within themselves, and they say the wrong thing,
yes,
that they're going to be attacked for it. So it really keeps people from being vulnerable in that way. So we don't develop our confidence. Because
And,
we
yes.
judge confidence, actually.
We judge it, and we judge. And unfortunately, we are in a climate of narrative warfare where everyone is constantly policing our words.
Yes.
Our words are getting hijacked. Our words become weaponized.
Again, it's not from the heart space.
It's not from the heart.
It's almost like we need to go into the heart space and then speak our mind. If anyone can take anything away, it's like try to connect with your heart and be in that open space within your heart. Try to consider the collective and do the best you can. Just do the best you can.
Yeah, and it's also one of the things that I do sometimes is and I wrote these little things together with my with my sort of co-founder now, Miriam, is we have this little thing where we talk about reclaiming words, and it's about taking a word that is being weaponized and kind of looking at its history, the etymology of a word, and then celebrating that and going, you know what, we have to take those words back and use them in the way that they should be used. Like the word radical. The word radical has been weaponized to instantly make you think of, a violent person or a dangerous person, because the states are doing that. They're, they're weaponizing language again to kind of point fingers and organize us and vilify people. But the word radical comes from roots. It's like going back to the roots. That's
I love
what radical
that.
means.
Which is where we need to be.
Absolutely.
Is it at the root, like the change happens at the root. Yeah, it's interesting. You were talking about how everything is just, we put a Band-Aid on everything and we're moving too fast, because I don't think we take the time to go to the root. It's interesting. We were talking about plants earlier and how you have a good green thumb, you have a good eye, and I don't so much. I'm trying, but not so much. But I think that's a good practice, because to make something really grow, we have to go into the root, whether it's political system, education, even just in a one-on-one type of exchange. It's always considering that root.
Yes, I mean, to get me started on forests, all of the kind of recent, science and all these books have been written about forests and how, we were made to believe that trees compete with each other and that all these organisms in a forest compete with each other. And now we know that it's not true. Forests are ecosystems that collaborate, communicate, support each other. Different species have a different role to play, right? And, you can chop down a tree, but the roots of the other trees will keep that one alive underground. And so, I think we should think about the work we want to do in change making like a forest, It's like you have your skills, I have my skills. How can they work together, Not everyone can go out in the street and demonstrate. Maybe, you're afraid of crowds, or you don't have the abilities, or you're not living near where things are happening. There are very many ways that we can take part in, movements for change and civil disobedience. And we can think like a forest, Okay, sometimes let them rest and let this group take over, But we have to do it in a connected way. That's how it stays alive. And in a way, this is what's gone wrong, I think, with a lot of NGOs. Unfortunately, we've been categorized. So I worked in children's rights for a long time, but it was very frustrating how children's rights are here, women's rights are here, people with disabilities here, indigenous groups here, and the donors we fund children or we don't fund children. We fund women or we fund, LGBTQI or we fund XYZ. And so we get divided. And then what happens? We are divided. We start looking at each other suspiciously. We believe we compete for funds. We believe, and so we just waste all this time in fighting or mistrusting each other rather than building a movement that is, at the end
inclusive.
Of the day, we all have the same powers that are, harming us collectively.
I want to touch on this warrior spirit again for a moment, because I think a lot of people want to develop a warrior spirit in themselves. So what does it mean to have a warrior spirit to you, and how can somebody embody that in themselves?
I'm on the early journeys, I guess, of the training. So the biggest challenge was when I applied for the training. Those who were interested in applying for the training were invited to do some reading, to listen to some conversations, Meg Wheatley, some podcasts and conversations, read some texts and answer some questions. But you had to agree. There was sort of if you want to apply to the warrior training.
And just so everybody knows, yes. Margaret Wheatley, a little bit about her.
Margaret Wheatley is an American writer, teacher, former leader, consultant, trainer. She's written many books. She's been doing sort of change work for maybe 50 or 60 years or something. She's phenomenal woman, and she's leading the training, and she pulls a lot of the teachings from sort of indigenous teaching. She has indigenous teacher and knowledge from philosophy, from Buddhism, from Zen Buddhism, from many places. And she started, I want to say maybe 8-9 years ago, she kind of felt that she wanted to give all her time to existing leaders, activists, citizen activists, and train them in her 50, 60 years of work had sort of given her this wisdom and understood that, what is at stake today is the human spirit. And so how do we train? How do we cultivate it? And so she started this training. But to sign up to the training, I had to sort of agree, I cannot change the world. And that was hard. And I sat with that for days because I still had this, I can change the world, But I already knew deep down that, of course, I can't. It's a lie we tell ourselves to keep going. It's like hope, hope is just a sort of something to, come on, you can do it kind of thing.
But wouldn't you say every individual action creates like waves of change? So in a way, we can change the world?
Well, it doesn't mean you cannot have any impact, but I am not going to stop climate change, feed the hungry, end conflicts, or, and we have to understand history. We have to understand where we are in history. And so some of the texts that we had to read, one is about how empires collapsed. I can't remember the exact title. It's a British historian who had written this piece, The Fall of Empires or something like that. And so it's about, you have to understand history. And things don't just go in one direction, the pendulum.
Things are not linear.
Things are not linear. And there are patterns that reappear, and we have to understand where we are in history. We need to understand the world if we want to have impact. And what happens a lot of the time is, I want to do this. And I was totally like that. And I think this is the thing. It's like, I want to do this change. I'm going to create an app and save the world. Not going to happen. We decide what we want to do rather than what is needed in the world. What can I actually offer rather than...
Where do the roots need to be tended to in different areas?
So it's not about, I'm going to change the world. It's about what is needed and what can I actually offer,
Again, going back to almost like the collective mind.
Yes, collective mind.
And looking at it differently.
Yeah. But it's hard because I was like, I want to change the world.
Yeah.
And it was hard, but I knew deep down that she was right. So I was like, yeah, I agree. I agree to that. And once you agree to that, not just superficially, but really sort of start thinking about what that means, then you look at the world differently. Because then you go, okay, instead of screaming, blah, 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 this is bad or this is good or whatever, okay, now I need to understand what's going on. I need to understand what is going on. And so some of the training is, how do we let go of our biases? We look at the world in a way because we have our own filters, because of our education, because of where we grew up. We look at the world also how we want to see it. So how do we learn to see clearly? How do we learn to see what? Yeah. And by learning to see clearly, you can go, so what does this situation need? And how can I help? So it's about service.
An aha moment, yeah.
It's about service.
Right.
It's not about what I want to do. It's about service. And this is a very hard shift to do because it takes it out of your hands as, you know, we're on such an individualistic world.
We've been programmed.
Entrepreneur, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And people admire these, you know, narcissistic billionaires who do X, Y, Z. I don't know why, because it's a freak show to me. But it's like the sort of the culmination of, you know, if we take capitalism, and if you imagine capitalism was a person, it would be a total psychopath, right, who needed to be locked up.
Yeah.
But so all of the qualities, competition, you know, winning, greed, take for me, I am awesome in all of this, I don't care about other people. That's what capitalism does, right? It's like if capitalism was a person, it would be a total psychopath who needs to be locked up.
Interesting. It's almost looking at like these structures or these paradigms as a person is a really helpful analogy.
Yeah, and so we are pulled into this way of thinking. So it's really hard to resist that, right? Because it's not like, okay, I'm going to recycle. Sure, recycle. It's not going to change anything, but sure, we should recycle. But actually, you know, we should consume less, etc. But you know, so we're constantly sort of pulled into, okay, you're done being an entrepreneur, making money. I'm going to be a social entrepreneur. But it's the same mentality. I'm going to fix the world.
Coming from the same energy.
It's not going to work. If you think you're going to be a social entrepreneur and create something that's going to get rid of plastic in the oceans, that's going to change the world, it's not. It's great that people want to do that, but that's not what the world needs right now. That is not what we need. We don't need more.
So tell us, what does the world need, and how can someone embody a warrior spirit and start helping?
I think one of the first things we need to do is take care of our mental health. Because I see it around me. People are struggling. You know, it comes back to, we were talking about fear. People are scared. I am, you know. If I read the news, it's like, wow. So we need to take care of our mental health, of our humanity. What is that, you know? How do I open my heart when things are difficult? How do I turn towards people, not away from people? And it's a physical thing as well as a mental thing, you know? And this is when I was talking to some former colleagues, you know, I was telling them, I think today, if we think about strategy, or I think it doesn't matter what issue you work on. If it's reproductive rights, or if it's, you know, rights of prisoners, or whatever it is, feeding hungry people, it's the issue. It's not actually about the issue you work on. It's how you show up in the world. I think that's the most important today, because you see more and more there's conflict, and that's an expression of our inability to deal with what's going on inside of us.
Absolutely. It's a mass projection.
It's a mass projection, which it can then, on a scale of war.
And some people don't know. We're all just, we were a little bit sick and a little bit mad sometimes.
Yes.
And everybody experiences this. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
No.
We're a little bit, have a sickness as a society. So be kind to yourself. I think that's the first step you can take in mental health, is being kind and saying, okay, yeah, like, I don't know if I see everything correctly, and I'm just going to take some time to get well so I can be collective minded. Just starting with these simple truths and working on them and working on your mental health, I think is so important.
And I think we were not taught how to do this, right? We are still in a society where we are measured by the intellect. From a very young age. We separate children who can't do X, Y, Z. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And we are now in this society that is completely dysfunctional. And so we don't have the tools we don't have emotional intelligence. Maybe some people have it, but we're not trained in it. We're not trained in understanding. We're trained in hiding it. We're trained in pretend all is everything. We go with the flow, with what's trendy. Okay, there's toxic positivity. I'm awesome. And people do their Instagram things or whatever, and just pictures of how their life is amazing. But maybe on the inside, they're falling apart. And then maybe you go to the other side and you just show yourself crying and having a mental breakdown. And whatever you want to do, that's fine. But how do we work with what is happening? And because many of us don't know how to do it, look at the state of our world. Tribalism, conflict, war, domestic violence, they're all related to our inability to cope with our emotions, right? And I see around me, people are struggling. There's more, and I think the sort of what's happening at the macro level is now trickling down and starting to affect us on a personal level. And so you see relationships breaking down. I hear from people in academia, in NGOs, in many spaces, horrible things happening, conflict,
Right. But to instill some hope, I know, at least for me on a personal level, that a lot of awareness was born out of pain. So unfortunately, we don't want to be broken open, and we don't want to have these like cataclysms of experience, but they can be fertile ground. I mean, if you are in pain, it can be a relationship that you can really like grow out of. It can be the catalyst that gets you there. I mean, there's ways to become aware and to awaken and to find your human spirit that are healthy. But if we're not in a healthy way and we break open, it's also a way to go within.
And I think everyone has to find what is working for them. And I think this is why I think having a practice is so important, and it's finding what works for you, whether it's, yoga or Tai Chi or, walking. Walking is one of the most human, natural, ancient form of wisdom. Is that, whenever I can't understand something, I go for a long walk.
Right. And I was reading, because I like to move a lot, and I read that, there's all kinds of meditations. Like you can do walking meditations where you're just really mindful about how you're walking, and like walking up steps or hiking can be really good. You don't have to just sit with your eyes closed for an hour. When I dance, that's a form of meditation, or your Tai Chi. So there's a lot of forms of having that meditation that don't require just sitting, for those that
Yes, and if you look at sort of the ancient, Greek philosophers, a lot of the sort of, the dialogues and the conversations and the teachings were done walking, and most writers and poets, if you look at their kind of their lives, many used to spend hours every day walking just in the city, wherever they were, just walking, because it's a way of clearing the mind and so walking. So I think, people have to find their practice, and it's tough, but that's okay, it's okay. And it's we all get angry. Yes. It's a completely human reaction to situations. But if we're just driven by anger, it's in the long run, it's not going to bring anything positive, because it's also going to make us sick, but it doesn't necessarily going to bring about the kind of the positive change. So we each have to find what that practice is. I read, for example. This is how I, if I read the news and I see what's going on, and, images of dead children, I put it away, and I read. I try and understand the history of something, or and then I go for a walk and I listen to a podcast or something. Music is the other thing. So there's
lots of ways to decompress so you can stay aware, but also make sure you're taking care of your mental health.
Yeah.
Do you see a wave of positivity as well? Do you think that we can, as a collective, become more collectively minded? That and have you seen this in history, that there's potential?
I mean, I think that's how we're wired. We've just been divided, and with sort of hyper individualistic world, we've been torn apart,
particularly in the West.
And the West has tried to impose this view on many other parts of the world, but at our roots, we are community. We survive because of helping each other, and I think people are instinctively like that. Everyone is, but it's just been, it's almost like we've been, it's been ripped out of us, and we have to find it again.
Go back inward to the heart space.
And find our community. It's the most important thing, is our relationships. I think it's there. And I think people are starting to understand it. I think there is definitely a change. Whether I'm going to see positive change in my lifetime, I don't know. And this is the other thing. We have to understand that this is the other hard lesson. I might not see the impact of my contribution in my lifetime.
Which creates a selfless side to it.
But I'm part of a bigger thing of intergenerational work, of as long as I'm always going to be in that wave of people seeking positive change, this is okay, and this is hard as well, because again, we're white too. What's your impact?
What do I get from this?
Yeah. And sometimes I get asked these questions from people who work in, maybe in corporations. But they're like, what impact have you had? And I'm like, such an aggressive question, It's like, I'm not going to put a price on it, because I don't believe in your worldview. I understand where you're coming from, but it's such a toxic way of looking at the world. And it's individualistic. Sure, I've had this little impact, as we all do, from just being human among other humans, but it's not about measuring it like that. It's about, how are we growing this movement? And I do think that people are starting to understand that we have to connect better. That is,
and when you do, it feels so good.
Of course,
by the way. So it's worth, even I'm an infant in this space, but trekking in the right direction, and it feels so good to get in that lane and in that space. So it's worth sort of going inward and fighting for.
Yes, and because it feels like coming home, right?
Right, like you're home.
Being surrounded by people who look out for each other.
This has been such a wonderful conversation with you today. I feel like I've learned so much, and I'm sure everybody else has. So thank you. Thank you, Veronica, for coming and sharing your wisdom. And I appreciate everything you do, even if we don't see it.
Thank you. It's been really interesting to sort of have this conversation and put all of these ideas into words, because sometimes you have things inside your head and you don't know how they come out. So it's been really interesting to have a conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Veronica Yates today as much as I did. If you like this episode, please be sure to press the like and subscribe button, and I'll bring you more wonderful guests with great messages around change.